Welcome, one and all, to the long-awaited top 10 builds for Armored Core 6. Besides the obvious latency of this content, I want to give you my list for the top 10 strongest Armored Core builds. So without further ado, let's step right into the rankings. At the number 10 spot, we have everybody's favorite little android, Wally. Unlike all of the other builds in this video, this is the only one with the capability to cause emotional damage. Consider the fact that this little love-struck machine might be someone you're gonna have to kill one day. Personally, that blood is something I wouldn't want on my hands.
Oh no, this is so sad.
Much like in the movie, Wally will often feel out of place in unforgiving environments. This is because he has some weak little boosters on him, making him less mobile than you would like, especially in a game such as Armored Core 6. Because of this, Wally and his companion Eve will struggle to catch a hold of their enemies, and when they do, they will struggle to find the courage to finish the job, rather hoping for the slim possibility that you will turn over a new leaf rather than having to dig your grave. Lying just shy of the top of this list, we have the Smelter build. Besides having immaculate drip, the Smelter excels in 1v1 combat. My overall goal for the build was to make the flail weapon a viable choice in AC combat, and I sure seem to have achieved this. Boiling it down, the build will revolve around a tap and splat strategy, whereas you continuously charge the plasma launchers on your back until you find ample opportunity to release the absolute hellfire these cannons are capable of. The Smelter name derives from the fact that any victim of this yo-yo technique will soon find themselves starring as the next Ronald Lacey lookalike. But because of its low health, mediocre pressure, and slow maneuverability, it has found itself picking up the scraps in comparison to all of the other builds on this list. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. With blessing from the GOAT himself, this build is one for the ages. After all, you cannot shoot that which you cannot see. As a victim of my own stupidity, I didn't know about the lock-on system in Armored Core until the latter half of my first playthrough. This build goes out of its way to recreate that absolute dread I felt during that first playthrough.
You're quick on the uptake, aren't you? Splendid.
The camera angles really help to catch a sense of falling out of balance. Heck, the build's fashion is even an attempt to make you feel victimized by some sort of hallucinogenic drug. Who would have thought that the swoosh would be so meta? Unfortunately, the swoosh is no ailment for ill-equipped douchebags, so although this build shows excellence at times, I will not be ranking it any higher as the amount of ammunition this build gives you isn't sufficient for a lot of the longer missions in the game. As such, it will have its feet firmly planted at the number 8 spot. If the mosquito was Muhammad Ali, then Spray and Pray is the equivalent of Mike Tyson. They're fairly equally matched, but like a wise man once said,
if he hit me.
This build is by all accounts rather similar to the previous entry, but takes the cigar with its exploitative meta. See, if you are launching these shotguns individually, the firing rate is pretty subpar. However, what you can do is constantly switch between the guns and have them fire substantially faster than they otherwise should. Pair this with the highest possible energy firearm spec, you can create some pretty ridiculous damage values. Despite being essentially just beams of concentrated light, they also deal a substantial amount of stun damage on account of being shotguns, while also having some devious range on them. That said, the Spray and Pray suffer primarily from one thing: the skill curve. I want to place it higher on the list, but its playstyle is extremely rhythmic and complicated. It's like playing the game while also rubbing your belly and tapping your head simultaneously. Sometimes the drip goes so hard that the fit starts dripping flames, yo. Like, check me out. There is little that is more swagger than using 2 Moonlight Greatswords at the same time. This man is the living embodiment of Moonlight, shining down on your foes and burning them away with your glorious neon slashes. We all hate the Missile Man builds in this game, but I would say that this might be a step above, because there is a hard counter to the Missile Men in the game, but this hard counter doesn't work on Wave Rain, because if you try to charge toward the Wave Rain, you'll be cut down by rays of light. If that fails, you can always just self-destruct and kill him that way. This is truly one of the best team builds you could make for Armored Core 6, but it lags just a bit behind all of the other entries ahead due to one thing. It is very sucky in 1v1 scenarios, because it's actually fairly easy to strafe the Moonlight Greatsword slashes. Because of this, you leave the window wide open while you wait for your cooldowns, at which point your only other option is to self-destruct. And well, a self-destruct button is exactly that. Self-destructive. Whether it be Rick Grimes or Officer Earl, someone has to make sure the filth stays off the streets. Although this build does not have the same swagger in its run as Officer Earl, it sure as shit has the impact of Rick Grimes. Because when push comes to shove, you just got to beat the living shit out of your enemies with whatever stick-like thing you can get your hands on.
Besides, I already made you a promise.
In this case, it's a stun baton, which was the vocal point for the entire build. My goal was to make this otherwise useless mortar into a viable setup, and I properly managed to do this by creating the stun lock cycle you see here. Fighting this build is the embodiment of being too stunned to speak. Not necessarily because you're in some sort of amazement, but rather because your jaw will be fractured in 8 different locations before you even find yourself opening your mouth. Sometimes a build is just so strong that the majority of players fighting it prefer to give up fighting on a leveled playing field. Not because they are able to pull out anything to counter us, but rather because as so long as they remain grounded, they are toast. Literally. From this point onward in the list, we will see several occasions of rage quitters. It got so bad at one point that this guy dropped his weapons, and I took the time to send him a heartfelt apology before finishing the job. It was also from this point on that I began to struggle a lot with teams. Not because it was particularly difficult, quite the contrary actually. Because in teams, either one of 2 things would happen. 1, the entire team would immediately gank and kill you as quickly as possible. Or 2, someone would rage quit out of the match. Rain of Flame was particularly good in this regard, because he was always able to endure a whole lot before he passed on. But because of the obvious lack of vertical ability, there is a hard counter to it, which is why I cannot place this build any higher on the list.
I turned myself into a pickle! I'm Pickle Rick!
I tried making this guy look like a pickle, because pickle rhymes with prick. So this man is a prickle, and all he does is prickle you all day, so he's a prickle. You know, this guy's the perfect balance between stability damage and straight up damage. He is also the one who launched the most amount of projectiles over a period of time. In the entire game, I believe. The Prickler is like a Swiss Army knife. It does not fumble in any department. You can take it into any game mode and do exceptionally well with it. However, it lands on the number 3 spot because you can do better when creating builds for each individual game mode. So it does not reach those peaks in its gameplay, unlike the top 2. The Flying Hydra is easily my favorite entry in this video. If you're out looking to have fun with a build, then I highly recommend you grab a hold of this one, because I doubt there are any other events in game more satisfying than 4-shotting Balteus. I mean, this build is probably the most damage you're gonna be able to muster into a single shot. 9 times out of 10, you do not even need to break people's stability. The damage in it of itself is enough to take out most builds. It's also the best build you can use at a long range, as the distance in which these railguns can shoot is absolutely massive. Again, this build falls the highest in terms of my personal recommendations, as it's easily some of the most fun you'll have in Armored Core. But technically, it's not the strongest build you can make in Armored Core. Because of this, I am saddened to have to put the Flying Hydra at the number 2 spot. Before we jump into the number 1 rank, let us look at the honorable mentions that did not make it onto the list. First up, we have the original. The first build I ever created, used to finish off my first playthrough. If you're interested to see how it all went down, make sure to check out my playthrough on YouTube. Yeah, I know, shameless plug, whatever, get off my dick. Next up is the not so up and coming Texas chainsaw build. We've all seen it. This variation is just that. Basic. So despite the viability of the build, I have a channel to run. So let's keep the generic builds out of it, please. Last but not least, we have the Lob Knobber. This is just a goofy ass build I put together that somehow felt somewhat viable. It utilizes an exploit that lets you launch massive rockets instantly, so long as you dodge around in your wheelchair. Now then, without further ado, there is no name more befitting this build, as you almost feel physically ill using it against other players. So the polite thing would be to apologize before you even get started. I'm Sorry is the perfect build, and the matches in this showcase is the perfect testament to its capability. I did not lose a single duel, besides this one. And yeah, this was probably the only viable way you could ever win against this thing. But even then, it has the best generator in the game, so it still has the ability to chase you down. I just happen to be very bad at this sort of playstyle, so I lost. But besides this, I was met with a handful of rage quits and hate mail. And do I blame them? No, not at all. Because breaking it down, we have what is probably the best build you could possibly make in the entire game. First up, it has a lot of health and stability. Then it has the Viento handguns, which are able to stun you in a matter of moments, not seconds, but moments. Then we have the earshot to blow your eardrums out. Finally, we have the twin blade to absolutely blend anyone that gets too close. All in all together, these components contribute to what is easily the longest stun lock in the entire game. Truly, if you have any intention of using this build, then I will probably have to report you to the authorities, because being victimized by this thing couldn't possibly be healthy for your mental health. All in all, it is an absolute devious display of what Armored Core can look like, when pushed to its very limit.
The freelancer. Who had it all?
It is now my great pleasure to announce that I have finally been able to establish my very own displayed shop. So far I've added 2 new additions to my store: Black Death Chrome Pesta and Heart of Grail. There will be a link in the description, so make sure to check it out. Any and all contributions will be heavily appreciated. So without further ado, you specifically have yourself a wonderful day. Ciao!